My name is Charlotte Burton, and I'll be defending my undergraduate thesis for Barrett the Honors College entitled Facilitating Student Autonomy in the Collegiate Woodwind Studio. So today we're going to go through and define student autonomy, go through my intro, methods and procedures, my hypothesis, results, discussion, conclusion, and any questions. Student autonomy is defined as an end goal of education in which students are, quote, self-monitoring, strategizing, and taking responsibility for and ownership of the learning process. And that definition comes from Graham McPhail in his study Developing Student Autonomy in the One-on-One Music Lesson. And basically, student autonomy is all about being accountable for your own learning as a student. Student autonomy has a very long history of research. I would argue that it starts with Socratic questioning way back in ancient Greece when Socrates asked his students questions, and they had to critically think themselves about what they were thinking instead of just relying on a teacher to tell them the answers. In my research, I found 8 modern themes of student autonomy and 8 strategies through which people achieve student autonomy in their classrooms today. Those 8 themes were student-teacher rapport, peer learning, indirect teaching, technology-mediated feedback, student-selected repertoire, student goal setting, diversified autonomy, and practical autonomy, and I'll explain those as we go through. My methods and procedures for this study, it was an IRB-approved study through ASU. It was a 13-question survey that I sent to the 6 ASU Woodwind professors at ASU. Oh, I said that already. But it was a 15-20 minute survey approximately, but we'll discuss that later. The goal of that research was to find out, do they know these 8 themes of student autonomy? Do they know these 8 strategies through which they can achieve student autonomy? And do they use them? And do they have any more ideas about student autonomy and how to achieve that specifically in a woodwind studio in college? My hypothesis was that all would use student-teacher rapport, all of them would use student-set goals, would use diversified autonomy. I predicted that half of them would use peer learning, indirect teaching, and technology-mediated feedback, and I predicted that only a few of them would use student-selected repertoire and practical autonomy to achieve student autonomy. In my results, all of them ended up using student-set goals as I predicted. All of them ended up using diversified autonomy as I predicted. They did all end up using indirect teaching, peer learning, student-selected repertoire, and practical autonomy, which I did not expect. And then half of them did indeed use technology-mediated feedback to achieve student autonomy in their woodwind studios. It was unknown if both participants used student-teacher rapport. I'm assuming they did, but we can't assume in research. One of the participants didn't quite answer the question, so we'll leave that as unknown. So half of them did, half of them we don't know. We had 2 responses to the survey. I sent it out to 6 professors. The most cited strategy to achieve student autonomy in the woodwind studio was using student-selected repertoire. I'll go through and discuss each of the 8 strategies. Student-teacher rapport, so 50% answered the question, the other 50% said that, or didn't answer the question. The 50% that did answer said yes, they use student-teacher rapport, and this is a very highly researched method of how to achieve student autonomy. So Jackie Wiggins is a modern music education philosopher and writer, and she writes a lot about teacher power and the idea that in the student-teacher relationship, the teacher will always have a certain amount of power over her or his students, and we have to be very conscious of that power and kind of lessen it in a teaching scenario so that we can be on the equal level with our students and really make them comfortable in our classrooms. Peer learning, all of the professors ended up using in their studios, and I didn't expect that, but this is a very well-researched method through which you can achieve student autonomy. There's countless studies on it, but in Sweden they had an economics class where they had a focus group that studied with peers, and then the other focus group received direct instruction, and the students who received peer learning, their test scores went way up. So there are a ton of studies on peer learning and how it really affects student autonomy in the positive way. Indirect teaching is all about, the concept is that students have questions about their learning and they are answering them themselves without relying on a teacher to give them the answers directly. So indirect teaching, all of the professors that participated use it. It's very, very well researched, and there's a recent MEJ article, Music Educator Journal article.
Is it still called that?
I don't know, but I don't think so.
Music Educators Journal, is it still called that, or is it? I have one at home, but I don't remember what it. Okay.
I know they changed it to NAFME, but I don't know if the journal itself changed names. But.
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Might be some reason what's on the shelf.
So Keith Foster wrote an article in there about how in his band programs he uses indirect teaching all the time to help students be aware of their own learning. So indirect teaching is a really well-researched way to help student autonomy in your classroom. Technology-mediated feedback, as I predicted, about exactly half of the participants use technology-mediated feedback. That's basically just recording video or audio of your students, listening back to it with the student, and then helping them come to a consensus with you about what the issues are. So a piano studio in Brazil used technology-mediated feedback, and they had really great results. And they did find that it really helped the teacher and the student come to a common consensus of what the issues are, and then they can go forth and fix them from there. And then the student was able to kind of use it on their own time and then go forth and become autonomous learners. Student selected repertoire was by far the most cited way through which to achieve student autonomy in my study. It's very well researched, especially in like band and orchestra, in high school and in choir, because they want to, really reel in the kids and say, hey, we can play these songs or these pieces that you really love, and that way it keeps their retention rates up and it keeps the student practice times up. So there's a recent Vincent Greco study with 5th and 6th grade band where they did this, and then the students who were involved in the self-selected repertoire, they got to play pop songs, ended up not dropping the program, and they practiced a ton more. So this is definitely well researched, and it is a good way of helping student autonomy. And as for student goal setting, all of the professors in my study said that they use goals with their students. And in a recent study that's related to mine, it's very similar, a lady interviewed 4 master vocal teachers and talked about how the teachers talked about how student goal setting is really important, and it's a really good launching point to help students become autonomous in the long run, and that once they start setting their own goals, they become aware of their own goals for learning, they can go out into the real world and really excel in that way. Practical autonomy it's just a word, and there's so many different definitions or different terms to kind of explain this, but practical autonomy, David Bode is the writer for this book, but practical autonomy is all about students control the curriculum and they control the content of the course to some degree. So that's what practical autonomy is. I did not expect any of the professors to use practical autonomy. I did not expect the students to have a lot of impact on the curriculum, especially the college course. But indeed, both of the professors I sent the study to cited using practical autonomy. And it is pretty well researched, but it is hard to find research on it because there's so many different names that they use to describe this phenomenon of students controlling their own curriculum. As for diversified autonomy, it's kind of a term that I coined, but basically it just means that you're diversifying autonomy based on the student's needs. If you go to the next slide, there's a nice little continuum that David Bode has in his book entitled Developing Student Autonomy in Learning, which I would definitely recommend. If you just read the preface, it's fantastic, and it really helps define student autonomy in a lot of different ways. So on one side of the spectrum, you have a student who needs a lot of support from a teacher, and on the other side of the spectrum, you have a student who needs almost no support from their teacher in order to learn best. So if you can remember one thing for this entire presentation, is that diversified autonomy and student autonomy must be diversified depending on your student, depending on your circumstances. It's not just black or white. giving control to the students is really dependent on how well that student learns and how well they can learn on their own. So, alrighty. In conclusion, the professors really know their stuff. I was happily surprised that the ASU professors really knew. They didn't necessarily know like the names of the terms, but they were able to cite a lot of examples of how they use these different strategies in their woodwind studios to achieve student autonomy. As I said, the most cited strategy they had was to use student-selected repertoire to help student autonomy. I think that may have been in part because of the order of the questions, and toward the last few questions, they just keep citing, they're like, oh yeah, like my students pick their own repertoire and that's student autonomy. So I think if I were to go back, I think I might reorder the questions a little bit so that is a very widely used example maybe toward the end, so the professors were thinking of more creative ideas that they use in their studios, because they do this a lot. And if I were to do one more thing over, I would definitely give the professors a lot more time to answer and say that it was a much longer survey than it actually was, because it was definitely longer than 20 minutes. It took some people much longer than that. So, and then I would definitely shorten the survey down to maybe cover a few of those strategies and not all 8. So that's kind of what I would do for next time. And then something that warrants further research would definitely be composing and woodwind lessons. One of the participants mentioned how they have students compose cadenzas, compose etudes, and that really helps their students become autonomous learners over time. So I think that warrants a lot more research. In conclusion, the study is a resource. It's a resource for educators in general, for musicians, for collegiate, woodwind professors specifically, but I think it really helped me kind of shape my own teaching pedagogy, and I hope that it will continue to help others shape their pedagogies as well. So at the end I have my bibliography, and that's it. Do you have any questions? Short and sweet.
In addition to giving people more time, you could consider, if you were to ever expand upon this, instead of having a bunch of open response questions, which take time because you have to formulate ideas and think about examples and stuff, you could have targeted questions and use a Likert scale. It's faster.
Yeah.
There's more questions. There'd be a lot more questions just to be able to get the information you need, but it's faster to do it from the participant end. So.
Yeah, multiple or multiple choice questions were possible, that kind of thing. I think.
Well, and that's how the Likert scale would be, like unlikely to, or very unlikely to likely, and so on. Because then you could really carefully construct questions that are of typical examples, student selected repertoire and things like that. It would be, I think you would have had a higher response rate.
Yeah, for sure.
And would have had a lot more information. And you could always have if you'd like to provide any additional examples, then you could get examples like the writing of cadenzas and things like that. You could get that from them if you didn't include it as an example.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I think you're done.
Okay.
You corrected all the stuff that I had.
Yes.
Were there any other questions that you had about my corrections? Any other questions you
I
had about
fixed
my
up the
corrections?
footnotes too because they were a mess, but
Yeah.
I looked at those today. I was like, I need to actually redo those.
Yeah.
So I redid them today, and they look a lot better.
Okay, good.
I think the whole thing was kind of cool.
Cool. Do you need to leave so you can talk?
No,
You can
not really.
talk. All right.